Well, I can know certain things because God has revealed himself and his word and law through scripture and through his natural revelation to me. So this is the only way that I can know things.
You want to keep this in mind, okay? I'm going to give you two theological terms.
Okay.
It's the principium ascendi. It's a theological term. It just simply means the ground of being, or the first principle.
Okay.
Then there's the principium. It looks like principium, but it's pronounced principium. Okay.
Yeah. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, that's the correct way of pronouncing it.
Well, like nobody knows what those words mean, so like.
Well, I'm explaining what it means.
Well, I know, but like, how is he going to use this in a debate if he brings up those words?
I'm trying to explain a concept to him that he doesn't remember the terms doesn't matter as long as he retains the concept.
Is it a principium, a portion received from an inheritance before general distribution? No, that's probably not it.
Well, that principium has to do with estate matters. Okay.
Yeah.
But in metaphysics, the principium or principium is a first principle.
Okay. First principle.
So God is the ground of all being, principium ascendi. Then there's another theological concept that is called the principium cognoscendi, which means the ground or foundation and basis of all knowledge. So the mind, the purpose, and the plan of God that he has instituted is the only basis in order for us to be in possession of knowing something. If that is denied, then they're going to be left with complete global skepticism. Their world will be shrouded in mystery. Our world is not shrouded in ultimate mystery. There are certain things of God that are mysterious, but God has providentially secured that the world reveals himself, Romans 1. So our world is not shrouded in mystery. So because of God's plan and his providential interdiction, we are come to know certain things. When they reject that, there's no ultimate metaphysical, identifiable, defensible foundation for you to ultimately know anything.
I have Google. It just says a basic assumption or proposition that cannot be deduced from anything else. A principium is a Latin word that means first principle. So now I know how to spell it. I'm not a very
We're not talking about an axiom. Okay? What we're talking about is the single ground of all being. Now, if one does not accept that there's a single causal first principle from which all things derive and depend, then they're either going to adopt that there are multiple discrete and independent things from which some things derive and others don't. But now you have a system of chaos. You now have a system of chance, because there is not simply one thing, namely the mind and plan of God, that is in complete oversight and control through his plan. So when they reject that God has revealed himself, right, then they forfeit their ability to speak meaningfully about anything.
Yeah.
I think you're being way too academic here.
Well, he wants to learn.
I can understand.
Yeah, but like people can't. I think we should give him like reading material and stuff, because people can't learn this stuff.
Already have.
Oh, he did. He gave me a lot. I actually have it on 2 flash drives.
And I was thinking, like, I was listening to Hemi debate earlier tonight, and he does mostly the abortion thing. And so I think for his, what does Bonson say? Like 80% of our job as an apologist is to say, hey, that's just your opinion, right? Point out that they're just. So I think really, like, that's where, especially if you're doing the abortion debate, I would just be constantly pointing out that, hey, you're arbitrarily deciding who's a human, who's not a human. who has value, who doesn't have value. That's like really simple and easy.
I agree. I think
a good way to
like,
illustrate this to them, I'd say, like, in your model of reality, two people
right.
disagree. What standard? How do we know who's right? And just that's an easy way to point out the absurdity of their position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the goal too is like when we're talking, like obviously you've been in some of the lives, mine and Miranda's and stuff, and obviously our goal is to glorify God. And I was listening. I don't know. I think it was on your page that I thought like was really good. That because they always laugh and kind of scoff when we talk about abortion just being basically it was the child sacrifice of biblical times. And I heard Darth say that women are exchanging, right? They're it's an exchange for bodily autonomy. And I hadn't thought about it that way. And I was like, that makes really good sense that they're at the time in biblical times, or 3,000 years ago, they were doing child sacrifice in exchange to different deities or things like that. Now they're just doing child sacrifice through means of abortion for bodily autonomy or whatever other reason, whether it be personal gain, financial gain, whatever the case may be.
Well, because they're worshiping human autonomy and human reason as the highest ideal rather than the mind of God.
It's about what you value. Like they're valuing their bodily autonomy over the life of the unborn baby. But what would God value more? God would value the life of the preborn baby more than their bodily autonomy. So they're putting something in a value above God, what God wants.
Yeah, that's one. And I wasn't like I couldn't find a way to point it out. I do. One thing that I do like to go into that I've been trying to talk about is like the problem of like, and I think me and Kanoa have been kind of going into the problem of infinite regress and how like God is the only way to get out of like epistemic circularity, right? Like there's no, if you're appealing to something, whether it be yourself or something else, I try to show them through like infinite regress that like they can't ultimately say why it would be wrong or be able to make any moral predications. And the only reason that they can do this is because God has written his law into our hearts. But for them to, like Darth says, is to speak intelligibly about anything that they say, God is necessary to be able to ground any moral predications that they're making.
Darth is going into the metaphysics behind language itself. So even like talking assumes certain like metaphysical things. But like people don't understand metaphysics, so I think that's like I totally agree. Like Darth's approach is like the best and all that, but it's just
I like yours too.
I'm not asking him to memorize my words.
Right.
I'm trying to pass on to him, like a professor would, these metaphysical concepts, and then he can break it down in his own words into everyday language.
I got you.
And I've tried to, I have probably 50 recordings of you, Precept, 50 plus of Darth that I just study and I make notes. And, I take it seriously because
it takes time. It took me a long time to learn this. It takes time. Like
Darth, can you actually explain something to me that Greg Bonson was talking about that was kind of hard for me to understand, but I was trying to track is it called monism?
Yes.
Monism.
Monism that just means there's just a world. It's just one thing.
Because I have actually a bunch of Sikhs that are trying to get onto my live, and people that are like Hindu and Sikhs that they're pro-life, but they also are aware now that I'm a Protestant Christian and they don't like what I'm saying because it's not leading to other people becoming
so
Hindus.
In the Christian worldview, we have the creator-creature distinction. There's God, and then there is his creation. So we have twoism, okay? We don't have oneism, we have twoism. The creator-creature distinction. Monism comes from the word mono, means one. It means there's just one thing that represents the world. Now, that one thing can be a set containing particulars, but it's still one thing rather than there's a demarcation between the creator and the creation. There are some good. There's a book on that. Hold on a second. Give you the title.
Yeah. And I think he was just talking about how, he was kind of going in on a lecture about how to ultimately kind of crush all these other faiths and prove that Christianity, the true and God of the Christian Bible, is the only God. That monism, if you understand monism, that you can defeat a bunch of these other, religions, because they're similar in the sense that they're like, say they believe that everything is one, or I'm not sure if I'm getting this right, but I'm trying to kind of get it out.
Yeah, monism would lead to knowledge being impossible.
Mm-hmm.
We need a Trinitarian ultimate.
Because it's circular?
Okay, so if you go, okay, so in the so in your your thumb drives with the books.
Yeah.
If you go to the Apologetics and Christian Philosophy folder,
okay,
there's a myriad of books in there. In that folder, there's a folder called Peter Jones.
Okay, I saw that one in there. Yep.
Okay, so he has several books that are dealing with the same theme. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He has one book. It's called One or Two.
Okay, one or
two. And the subtitle is Romans 1 for the 21st Century. Okay. Yep. And he's basically talking about the antithesis, as Van Til would put it, between the creator-creature distinction versus oneism, as Peter Jones would put it. Okay.
I see it. Yep, right here.
So they think that the world is just one. Okay, and that there is not a distinct and discrete realm that has precedence over the world, namely the mind of God. So if you might want to read that book One or Two. Okay.
Don't they don't they just fall into the same bucket as atheists though, because they have no external reference point to?
Yes, absolutely. Well, atheism is basically monism as well.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm thinking
other than some counterfeits of God, okay, that may pay lip service to the creator-creature distinction. Mm-hmm. Apart from the creator-creature distinction, all you have is every world religion would be following some aspect of monism. Yeah. But if you read that book, One or Two, that will help you understand what Bahnsen is talking about when he talks about monism.
Yeah, it was kind of a brief lecture I found on YouTube about it, and
definitely procure that book out of the Peter R. Jones folder in the Apologetics folder, and that will
a world of difference. One of two.
It's called One or Two. It's in the Peter R. Jones folder.
Okay, it's One or Two describes oneism and twoism, the two ways of being spiritual.
Twoism would be the creator-creature distinction. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, he subtitles the book Romans 1 for the first century.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, P. Mars, thank you for the paper. I'm going to definitely read that. And like I said, if there's any critiques that you have that I can do better, obviously, because I want to represent the argument to the best of my ability.
You're doing a good job, man.
I do take it with seriousness.
You're doing a good job, and I like that you're defending people who can't defend themselves. So I think that's really admirable.
Yeah, like I said, I don't try to take any of the glory for it. It's just to glorify God and what He wants, and obviously,
so in the Bahnsen folder is another folder called the Objective Proof for Christianity.
Yeah.
You need to read and study that book.
Is that one by Joshua Pillows?
Well, he's the editor.
He's the editor. Okay. Yeah. I had a bunch that you read, and then I've been ordering a couple of them, and then I'm glad that you gave me that folder because obviously that's just that's the honey hole of information. So.
Yeah. In that folder is my highlighted version.
Mm-hmm. Oh, is that okay?
If you want to see what sentences I highlighted.
Yeah. If you guys, like I said, if you guys ever want to come up, it's it's been crazy how much we've been having conversations with I mean, it's like so many atheists are coming up and they're pro-choice and they want to talk about AB, right? But why would I don't mean this in a rude way, but why do I want to sit there and listen? And I don't say this mean or anything, but they ultimately can't justify anything that they say. So
I heard you talking to someone tonight, and I thought about coming up, but then I was like, I kind of wanted you to like get some practice. Like it's good for you to practice.
Because they're enamored with their false belief that they are in possession of autonomous reasoning. This stems from several hundred years ago from something called the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
The Enlightenment was the abandonment of a biblical worldview and the exaltation of pure human reason, okay, and giving God the double middle fingers. So you have to understand that the way people think, that there's a historical precedence for this. Okay, people just didn't happen to start to think these ways by their own choice. Okay, this is a historical development that took several centuries. Okay.
Yeah, I just am. It's just kind of it's. I don't want to get frustrated with them. That's the thing that I'm trying not to do. Is because I don't want to, because I want them to know that I do love them, because Christ has commanded me to love them. I don't agree with their worldview and their position, but I notice how they want to keep going back to the topic of AB instead of actually grounding.
Well, here's can I say something that helps me with frustration? Is obviously praying for those who persecute you is great, but absolutely. I think about how like patient God has been with us. Right? God has been so patient with us, patient with Israel. Like we should be patient like God's patient.
Yeah, at church today, actually, my pastor.
Let me just say this before I forget. In the Bonson folder, there's a folder called the Trilogy. In there's a trilogy of short books, 3 of them, written by Bonson as well. You should read those as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
absolutely.
One is called Pushing the Antithesis, one is called The Impossibility of the Contrary, and the other one is called Against All Opposition. Now, there's a volume 1, 2, and 3. I don't know what the order is, but definitely study The Objective Proof of Christianity and read those books as well. And it will teach you how to push the antithesis, because whenever they assert what is or cannot be, apart from God's world and God's plan, they're just invoking a figment of their imagination.
Yeah. That couldn't be more true. Yeah, I agree. I thank you guys for the information. And yeah, like I said, P. Mars, I like that you have ways of just staying calm. Today in church, we were reading through Ephesians and how to deal with like anger, is that I'm not responding to anger the way that I used to. And it's hard to not have these reactions to people that are so evasive.
The more effective you become, the more they're going to try to antagonize you.
Absolutely. That's it. When they know that, like you say, is like they're not dealing with low-hanging fruit, then they start to waffle, deflect, be evasive, because they know that they can't actually ground their worldview. So instead of doing so, they just don't. They just start saying a bunch of stuff.
They're like 9 out of 10 of these people are not interested in what you have to say. So keep that in mind too.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Most of them are village idiots and trolls.
Yeah.
What's going on tonight?
Thank you, guys.
Go ahead, Trance. What would you like to say?
Yeah, Trance was next. He's been waiting. Yeah, thanks.
Sorry.
Thanks, buddy. God bless.
God bless, man.
I was just curious how abortion is child sacrifice.
Well, because God says it is.
Because God says it is?
Yeah, because God is our authority.
Where does he say that it's sacrifice, child sacrifice?
In the Bible. It says we're not to murder. And they're sacrificing the life of the child to the God of human autonomy and the God of convenience.
But God supports abortion. What about the bitter water?
Okay, well, first of all, in that passage in the Old Testament, it's not talking about creating or implementing a miscarriage. In fact, the Hebrew is not entirely clear. It can be understood to produce a woman who will be then barren rather than abortion. So you're just cherry picking one of many verses that atheists pick on.
The atheist script. Is there some website that trains you guys to repeat this crap? Like
Yeah, it makes you look silly when you quote these cherry picking verses. Number two, it's God's prerogative to end human life anytime he sees fit. It is not our prerogative to indiscriminately take life, whether it's the young or the old. So when you say God committed abortions, it's just simply, well, first of all, abortion is a surgical procedure.
You're against the death penalty?
Right? No.
But you just said that we shouldn't be the ones taking life, and we should leave it to God.
No, did you obviously you're not listening very carefully. I said it is not our prerogative before God to indiscriminately take life. The death penalty is not an indiscriminate taking life, and in fact, the death penalty is sanctioned both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament.
Well, we would say that God would use the human justice.
How is the death penalty compatible with turning the other cheek?
Because
in the Old Testament, for non-capital offenses, if somebody insulted you or offended you, Jesus said, to turn the other cheek in our day-to-day interactions with people. Okay?
That's not how I would interpret that.
The death penalty has to do with violating certain social guidelines that God has implemented both in the Old and New Testament, which would be considered to be capital crimes. Okay?
So you support all of the capital punishment in modern day?
I support capital punishment. In the days of the Revolutionary War, if you stole somebody's horse, okay, which was their livelihood, right? You could be executed. It's a capital crime. Today, horses are for leisure and for fun. They're not for maintaining people's livelihoods. Okay. So the bottom line is this: the Bible, God sanctions. He said, "For whosoever takes man's blood, by his blood it shall be spilled." So God, in the Bible, sanctions the death penalty.
Well, he sanctions it for also sexual immorality. Do you support that too?
Well, the penalty for that had to do with God's covenant relationship with Israel. Whether or not a society wants to permit that and emulate the laws that God gave to Israel would be up to any particular society. I think that our society would be way better off. We wouldn't have the vast destruction of inner cities. We wouldn't have all of the unborn babies that are being killed in abortion if we had more stringent laws. The bottom line is this: whatever the Bible, see, what you're doing is you're thinking that all of the Old Testament laws that God gave to Israel, that they're universally binding upon all people on the planet. And that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that there are certain inherent principles that reflect God's general purpose in creation that are reflected in Old Testament law that are binding upon all people. But not all of the statutes are universally binding in terms of like civil law. Okay?
Got it. So you want to kill people for having sex out of marriage. Got it.
That's not what I said. And right now you're being completely disingenuous and deceitful when you say that, which means that you're not a trustworthy person to talk to.
Yeah, I kicked him.
And he left. Okay, so
No,
he was being
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I kicked him. I kicked him when he said that.
Yeah.
So
He's trying to bait you into saying something horrible, but that's
we can't say these words on TikTok. So
Oh yeah. I'll be very careful with my wording, so if I have to be a bit slow. I was
in the world, let me just say this, in the world today, because of the violation of God's general principles in creation, one man for one woman, we have an unimaginable amount of sexually transmitted diseases and even people dying in early death because they contracted diseases. Do you know how many women in years gone past have died of various types of cancer because they contracted sexually transmitted diseases that they didn't even know they have? Okay, have you ever heard of chlamydia? Right? So God's laws for Israel, if they were followed in principle, would mean that there would be people getting these sexually transmitted diseases or genetic diseases. These people, they think they know everything.
Darth, I had heard a different interpretation on that. I think that turn the other cheek gets grossly misinterpreted as to like be patient with crap from people or something.
No, it meant not to retaliate.
No, I heard an interpretation where, I would say not to retaliate with violence, I would say, because so it has to do with like in Israel, right? There was like
you could respond. You could criticize them for slapping you.
Okay, well, here's what this. I read an exegesis that I thought was really interesting. So it has to do with like in Israel, their customs, right? They had the like one hand was for unclean tasks and one hand was for clean tasks thing, right? And also there was a custom when like you slap someone who's like a lesser status than you give them a backhand slap. To slap them with the forehand would be like how you would slap an equal. And because they can only slap with one hand because of the right hand, left hand, clean, unclean thing, they can only hit their...
I think that you're barking up a wrong tree.
Am I? Really?
Yeah. It's just simple. It just simply means that when somebody delivers you a socially, how shall I put it? Somebody delivers to you something that's socially disgracing or an insult, that you're not to physically retaliate.
Well,
that doesn't mean you can't respond verbally.
He was saying like because they could only do a backhand slap to a slave, and so if you turn the other cheek, then your master.
No, it's talking about if they slap you as opposed to somebody physically assaulting you. Okay, if they slap you, this is intended as an insult. So when Jesus says turn the other cheek, what he is saying is you don't slap them back physically.
Right. But you also it's also he's standing up for himself and he's showing that he's the equal, because by turning the cheek, if you were to slap him again, you would have to slap him as you would slap an equal with like the forehand.
We have to be careful that we don't read more into certain things Jesus said than is readily available in the text. I perfectly agree with you that there are certain cultural and historical factors that are pertinent to many things.
Right.
But it's just very simple that they slap you as a matter of insult.
Okay, I hear what you're saying.
Look, let me give you an example. Paul certainly was one of the greatest believers. When the high priest said something to him, Paul didn't know it was a high priest, and he told him that he was a whitewashed tomb. Right? The priest was very insulting to Paul, and Paul, you're a whitewashed tomb. Right? So turning the other cheek simply meant that you didn't retaliate in kind, meaning the physical slap.
One quick story and then I'm done. So I'm a baby. I consider myself a baby Christian. I became a Christian like 5 years ago only. And when I was early in just becoming a Christian, I would go on Praise I Ams, and him and Gavin pissed me off so badly one time. I moved.
Praise is an immature person.
Yes. They pissed me off so much that I mooned them on my camera. And when they all told me and they all told me that's not very Christian of you, P. Mars, I go, well, Jesus said to turn the other cheek.
Okay, well, that's funny. Well, you know something? Praise has repeatedly gone after people that he has a variety of disagreements with, and he's been utterly obscene and vulgar to a wide array of people, including myself. Look, we all, like, from time to time, like, for example, if I get angry at somebody, I might drop an F-bomb, which I shouldn't do. But praise routinely, as a matter of practice, when he disagrees with debate content, debate content with people, even if I were to agree with him that some of the people that he's disputed, where he's right and they're wrong, he has done caricatures and spoken of them in utterly vulgar and obscene ways. Myself
very immature,
included.
like fart
Okay,
noises.
this is ghastly behavior on the part of praise.
It's actually
Praise is not stupid.
I guess you're right. Like, he's more immature than what I did by mooning him. That guy is like way more.
He is. Well, look. It's not that he's stupid, but he's an extremely immature person, and he remains this one today. He has backstabbed me. I can't tell you how many times. Anyway, welcome, Meeps. What would you like to say?
I think Dale was waiting. Dale.
Well, I thought Dale was done. Dale, do you want to say anything else?
I didn't want to get in the way of any other people's questions.
Well, let's go to. We can go to Meeps first, I guess.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I can't hear you.
Thanks. I just wanted to talk because I don't believe in the 1, 2, and 5. Like, science is a theistic concept. Because the idea of science is more like applying the scientific method. And where has the scientific method been applied to proving God?
So let me ask you this question, okay? We have two models of reality. We have the God world and the not God world. Okay? In the God world, God functions as the single causal first principle. The mind and plan of God actualizes what the world is in that model of reality. Okay? Do you understand that so far? Okay. So in the not God world, God is excluded. So there is no identifiable single causal first principle that actualizes everything. Okay. So when you talk about doing science, you're going to have to presuppose a number of fundamental parameters, right? So in the God world, it's the mind, the purpose, and the plan of God who actualizes the regularity of nature. He constructs a world that is rational. He makes the world rationally apprehensible, and he endows man with the capacity of logic and reason. And through studying the world that God has made, we can understand, or at least come up with explanations of things that are not immediately apparent to us in the God world. In the not God world, when you apply the scientific method, you're adopting the notion that you are a rational being, that the world somehow provides you with rational faculties, and that you can have access to a rational world, and that the world operates in certain regular ways, meaning that there's a regularity of nature. So in a not God world, what is it that actualizes the regularity of nature as a precondition for science?
Well, give me a second. I need to see something.
Yeah. Since you reject that God is the self-revealing God in creation and human history through Jesus Christ, then you're adopting that there's something else that is actualizing the regularity or uniformity of nature. So what is the something else? Okay? Because the uniformity of nature would have to be true in order to begin to defend the scientific method in a world without God. So what is the something else that actualizes the regularity of nature?
Well, we can just look at other things we find in nature.
That's not an answer to my question. Sir, I'll repeat the question that you didn't answer. Since you reject that God, the mind and plan of God, actualizes the regularity of nature, you believe that there's something else that actualizes the regularity of nature, correct?
Apart from, there's not exact regulation of nature as well.
Sir,
but apart
you are
from
dodging my question. Do you believe that something else actualizes the regularity of nature?
Yeah, that's other things we find in nature. That's what I've been trying to say.
No, sir. Is there something that actualizes the regularity of nature? Yes or no?
I mean,
this is an entirely legitimate question. You're claiming that you can do science rationally without reference to a single causal first principle, namely the mind and plan of the self-revealing God. So you believe that something else actualizes the uniformity of nature, right? You told me yes. Now, what is the something else that actualizes the uniformity of nature? You see, you just want to take the uniformity for nature just granted. It just is. Well, based upon what?
What uniformity is this, though? There is no, exact in this world.
Look, let me explain something to you, okay? Every scientist that goes into the laboratory or does scientific investigations, including a toddler who goes into the bathroom and then flushes the toilet, okay? Every human being, unless you're brain damaged, right, operates under the principle that nature operates in certain regular ways amongst some irregularities. Okay? Now, either the regularity of nature is true and actualized by virtue of the mind and plan of God, or something else. You're telling me that you can do science which depends upon the uniformity of nature. Good. I'm just asking you, what's the something else that actualizes the realness of the uniformity of nature so that you can do science?
Just personal, experiences, you know?
That's not an answer
That doesn't have to be an
That's begging the question. In order to have personal experiences, the uniformity of nature would have to be true. I'm asking you, is there something else that actualizes the uniformity of nature? Yes or no?
The uniformity of nature.
Yeah, if you dodge the question one more time, we're going to be done. Is there something else other than the mind, the purpose, and the plan of God that actualizes the uniformity of nature?
I mean, you just kick me out at this point. I've tried to give you answers, but
no, your
the only answer you want is...
Okay, listen. Your answers were not specific or germane to my questions. They're the kind of things that you will say because you don't want to admit that you don't have an explanation for the realness of the uniformity of nature. That's why we're explaining to you that science is ultimately a Christian theistic product, because the mind, the purpose of and the plan of God is God actualizing the world, and the world operates in terms of the regularity of nature that is imposed and actualized by the mind, the purpose, and plan of God. You think you have no need of God. Okay, good. I'm going to take you at your word. What is the something else that actualizes the uniformity of nature? That'll be the last time I'm going to ask you the question. Because if you don't answer the question, you have no grounds to object to point number 5. Does science depend upon the uniformity of nature? Yes, it does. Is the
What does that
uniformity of
even
nature
mean, the uniformity?
the uniformity
It's
of
not a
nature?
uniform world.
Okay, all right. Listen, young man, you don't know what you're talking about. You're frustrated in this point because you've been outmaneuvered here. Your materialism is failing at this point. You think that you can defend science in a not God world. I'm proving to you right now you're not defending science, because science depends upon a number of foundational parameters, including which is the uniformity of nature.
Can I explain that real quick?
Yes.
So the uniformity of nature, the idea that when you touch a hot stove, it burns your hand. You believe in the future because nature is uniform. When you touch a hot stove, it'll burn your hand. That's the uniformity of nature. When the future in the past,
future will,
Not if you have water on your hand.
not if you have water.
What you're doing is a form of special pleading. You're changing the parameters. Okay? Now, notice once again, you believe you can do science without acknowledging the self-revealing God who is behind the creation in the world. Okay, fine. I'm going to take your word for it. What is it that actualizes the uniformity of nature?
Yeah, I don't know what you mean by the uniformity of nature. I'll just leave at this point. I don't understand what that uniformity of nature means.
There are certain things in the world that are regular and will be regular like they were in the past. Science depends upon the uniformity of nature.
That there's order in the world, that there's consistency in the world. How do you not get this?
Okay.
Like, things aren't chaos. Like, nothing's random, right? Like, when you drop a pencil, it doesn't randomly go into the sky because nature's uniform. If nature wasn't uniform, things would just be random all the time. You drop the pencil, it would maybe just hover in the air.
So what I'm showing to you is this, okay? That in a Christian theistic model, where we accept that God has rationally revealed himself through creation and rationally revealed himself through the prophets and ultimately in Jesus Christ codified in the Bible, God has made it very clear that he is the single causal first principle that actualizes everything according to his plan. When you feel that you can speak intelligibly about your world and even defend science as a legitimate endeavor without reference to God, I'm taking your word for that. And I'm asking you, good, you reject that God actualizes the uniformity of nature. Okay, what's the something else that actualizes the uniformity of nature? And you're frustrated because you know you can't answer it. So therefore, you cannot claim to rationally defend science in a not God world, because there's nothing within your model of reality that is identifiable and defensible that imposes and sustains the uniformity of nature that you take for granted.
So if we reject the Christian God, then we can't do science because we live in a world of chaos.
You see, whether you agree with us or not is not the point. We are being consistent within our model of reality that the mind, the purpose, and the plan of the self-revealing God of Christianity is the ultimate and singular precondition and prerequisite for everything, including the uniformity of nature. So if the uniformity of nature cannot be rationally accounted for apart from God imposing it and sustaining it according to his plan, then you can't claim to have a rational basis for science, because science depends upon the uniformity of nature.
But there's no reason to believe that that would be God. There would be no understanding.
When you say there's no reason to believe that, what you're doing is you're making a counterclaim that the world is not emblematic and entails ultimate design and intentionality. Okay? What you're now claiming then is, what you're claiming is first and foremost the rejection that the world indicates dependence and derivation from God, And rather, what you're advocating is that the world is emblematic of independence from God. Either the world is emblematic of dependence upon God, or the world is emblematic of independence of God. When you say there's not a reason to believe that, are you in a default position of the world is independent of God?
Oh, yes.
Good.
I don't believe it.
What's the reason for that?
Because I haven't seen any proof. I've seen reasons
what you have just committed here is what is called an appeal to ignorance fallacy. An appeal to ignorance fallacy is that a proposition is to be considered to be true because it hasn't been falsified. Your position is that the world is to be reckoned to be independent of God solely on the grounds that it hasn't been falsified by somebody showing to you that the world depends upon God. That's an appeal to ignorance fallacy. Now, the only way that you can escape the appeal to ignorance fallacy is to give me a rational justification of how you determine that the world is independent of God. Do you have a reason for that?
Yeah, because there isn't like a reason that there wouldn't be.
Look, you're repeating an appeal to ignorance fallacy. That the world is to be reckoned to be independent of God because it's not falsified. Okay? That's an appeal to ignorance fallacy. Are we clear? What if I said to you, would you accept the following? I accept that the world depends upon God because I don't have a reason to believe it's independent of God. Would you accept that line of reasoning?
Sorry, could you say the question again?
Yeah. If I said to you, the world depends and derives upon God solely because I don't have a reason to believe that the world is independent of God, is that a valid form of reasoning? You see, what you're doing here...
Not quite, but you're posing the question as if God is an absolute.
Sir, this is what, when unbelievers like yourself get confronted, you're ignoring the question. Would you accept my reasoning that the world is to be reckoned to be dependent upon God because I don't have a reason to believe it's independent of God? Is that valid? Or sound? Because if you say no, you're going to indict your own reasoning.
But that's...
What you are doing right now, the reason why you're having trouble is because what you're doing is what the philosophical paper Atheological Apologetics talks about. You are smuggling in God denialism, but without defending it, but reckoning it to be a default position for which does not require a justification. My line of questioning to you is exposing the fact that you're smuggling in a God-independent world and reckoning it to be default without arguing for it. I gave you a rationale for how the world is emblematic of ultimate design and intentionality. You don't accept that. Do you have a rationale that the world is emblematic of independence from God without saying, yeah, because I don't have a reason to believe the contrary? That's an appeal to ignorance fallacy.
Well, I don't have the Bible with me right now, so I can't look at verses, but
it's not going to help. Dude, it's not going to help you. I have 14 years of experience debating atheists.
Okay? The unity of, what was it? The unity of creation.
Science is a theistic concept because what undergirds science are a number of foundational parameters, one of which is the uniformity of nature. Either science will be undergirded by the fact that the world is emblematic of ultimate design and intentionality, and because the world does reflect and reveal God by his purpose, God being the absolute, he creates and secures the uniformity of nature. Well, if you reject that, you have some explaining to do.
So you thought you're shocked, aren't you? You've been caught with your pants down because you came in here didn't think we had any way to defend what we're saying. But the opposite is true, right?
You see, one thing that unbelievers do all the time is they think that not accepting an opposing point of view is a rebuttal. It's not. Not accepting it is an implicit counterclaim. But that implicit counterclaim is going to have to be unpacked and defended.
But then, with biology, what is the idea that it's always going to stay the same? Because when you said you would retract your hand...
Hold on a second. I don't understand your first statement.
Yeah, I think he's saying we're not saying it always stays the same. We're saying in the future.
That's not what we're saying. No, what we're saying is... No, we're not saying... Okay, the uniformity of nature does not mean that nothing changes.
What you've just said is something true and related it to God.
I'm trying to explain to you. The uniformity of nature doesn't mean that nothing will change. It means that there are certain aspects that are regular alongside that there are irregularities. It's called the principle of continuity and principle of discontinuity. There's continuity for certain things and there's discontinuity for others. There's regularity for some things and irregularity for others. Okay?
But in what way does that have God being the reason for it? Because what you've just said is that, something very obvious that everyone knows, and then you just said that's because of God.
I explained to you that the world is emblematic of ultimate design and intentionality by God's purpose. Therefore, the world is a revelatory environment by God's purpose to us. Now, if you don't accept that scenario, you will instantaneously be making a worldview counterclaim that the world is not emblematic of ultimate design and intentionality. Okay, so then what you're saying is that the regularity of nature is real and actualized by something else and not God. Okay, I'm holding you to your position because you don't have the privilege or the prerogative of expressing neutrality. There's no neutrality here. Either the world and the uniformity of the nature is God-dependent and God-derived and emblematic of God or not. If you then stake out the position that it is not, you're going to have to explain your position. You don't have the luxury of sitting on some alleged default position of a world independent of God until shown otherwise, because that's an appeal to ignorance fallacy. But you see, unbelievers and atheists have been doing this for hundreds of years. They're smuggling in God denialism without arguing for it. Claiming you're
said that it was...
Look, let me explain something to you. When you do not accept that God is the self-revealing God through creation, you're not simply in a state of incredulity where you're just an innocent bystander, where golly shucks, you're unconvinced and you're in some default position. The Christian theistic position of the self-revealing God is not a novel introduction or overlay upon an already default position. Okay? Because that's the way unbelievers would like it to be, or the way that they'd like to think of it. You see, what we have is a clash of worldviews. We have a conflict of systems. Either the world is God-dependent, God-derived, or the world is not God-dependent or God-derived. Okay? Now, if you're going to reject the reasoning or the rationale for a God-derived and God-dependent world, in that the world exemplifies ultimate design and intentionality by God's purpose, then you're going to be staking out the counterposition that the world is God-independent. Okay, good. Then you're going to have to explain yourself. Isn't that fair?
Yes, but I've been saying that.
Good. Then explain your world. Why do you have an expectation that the future will be like the past? Is there something within your overall system that is absolute and invariant, that secures that some things will be regular tomorrow like they were yesterday? Is there something that imposes that?
But I don't think that's any reason to believe in.
You're not
God,
focusing on my question. What you're doing is you're ignoring what I'm presenting to you because you don't have an answer.
Because maybe an answer is more than 4 words, and I have to get around to that.
Sir, you have yet to explain what is the something else that actualizes the persistence or the perpetuity of the regularity of nature. Is there something that secures that other than you?
And what if I say no?
Well, then you have no basis for science, because if there's not something that is in and of itself invariant and absolute that actualizes and sustains the regularity of nature, then you have now destroyed science. Science requires, as one of several fundamental parameters, that the uniformity of nature be true. So I just tried to ask you, for point number 5, I showed you why science is a Christian theistic concept, right? And your position is it's not a Christian theistic concept. Well, I took you on your word. So explain to me what it is that ultimately undergirds the uniformity of nature in order to say science doesn't depend upon God. And you have nothing.
Because your idea is that there has to be something there.
Because don't you understand?
Because the way that we know that things happen is that we look from other things and take inference on how that affects other things.
This is going over your head. So we're going to have to go over it again. You, in your model of reality, if things are going to repeat, things are not going to repeat because it's a part of God's plan. So why are things going to repeat?
Well, what if we don't know? And you're going to say ignorance fallacy. But sometimes it's okay to not know.
Okay, young man, I just showed you that you cannot defend the viability of science in a not God world.
If you don't know,
demonstrated it to you.
If you don't know, the entailment is that 5 is true. If your answer is I don't know, then 5 is true. So you lost the debate.
I just made listen to me. I just gave a rational case for point 5. You do not accept, let me finish. I made a rational defense of point 5. You do not accept that my rational defense of point 5 is valid and sound. But when you do not accept that, you're making a counterclaim. Do you realize that? And I want you to answer that question. When you do not accept my defense of point 5 as I have given it, you are making a counterclaim. Are you not?
Yes.
Good. Your counterclaim is that something else actualizes and sustains the uniformity of nature so that we can have science. Right? Is that your position?
Yes, but...
Good. What's the something else that actualizes and sustains the uniformity of nature so that science can be viable without reference to the plan of God? What's the something else?
We don't know. No one knows.
Well, guess what? So if you don't know, you're denying God in virtue of I don't know.
Because you said that it's all from intentional design. You can't see any.
You're not. Listen to me. Are you denying that God is the ultimate foundation for science and the uniformity of nature?
What do you consider to be science then? Because it sounds like you're thinking of it
Sir,
as...
notice how many times you have dodged my reasonable question. Are you denying
That's
that
because
God
I'm trying to narrow down what the question means.
Sir, listen to me. The reason why you're dodging is because answering the question implicates your position as being bankrupt. Are you
It's
denying...
hard to answer a silly question.
Okay. It's not a... Okay, you're
when
done.
It's on flawed grounds.
Okay, goodbye. Yeah,
it's
goodbye.
on flawed grounds, man.
Okay. Did you see that? Notice, because it was a relevant question, it was a germane question, right? So what they do is they resort to lying. Oh, it's a silly question. No, it's not a silly question. It's not a flawed question to ask you, what in your model is it that undergirds the uniformity of nature?
I think we've just demonstrated that was shell shock, pretty much, that whole thing.
Yeah, and what it is people will come out and they will lie. How is me asking him what is it that undergirds the uniformity of nature that's not God? Oh, that's a silly question.
Notice how he basically admits he has no idea how to answer it towards the end, but
so in other words, I give
listen.
a rational explication for point 5, and his rebuttal is, I don't know, did it?
Well, notice at the beginning he tried to answer the question, right? But then at the end he's like basically admitting that he can't answer the question. So if he can't answer the question, like, why was he even trying to answer it? You know? And this is what they do. They know they can't answer the question, but they'll answer the question, even though they know they don't know how to answer the question.
Yeah. So what he wants to do is, and what they want to do is they want to say, there's something that actualizes the uniformity of nature. I don't know what it is, but I do know it's not God. Well, if you don't know what it is, how do you know it's not God?